All right, everyone, can you please take a seat? And we wait for 1 more minute until the other room starts overflowing, because I think that's going to be full as well. Yeah, we're not going to waste too much time here. All right, can everyone please get seated who wants to see this talk here, so we know like how many are standing in front of the door, because I think that's going to be overflowing there too, and we need to exchange here. Yeah, I think we have to give it another minute. Yeah. Because there's like 100 people in the room. No, it's just going out and in. Right, so. Okay, that's calming down. So we have a talk here from Saber Interactive, and Kirill was supposed to give it, but unfortunately he can't make it to come here. So Ruslan is kindly taking over and will give you a talk about the rendering technique behind Warhammer, Space Marine 2, and RoadCraft. So if you haven't seen it, like those are like two games which couldn't be more different, and yet they managed to run on the same engine and using like similar technology, which I think is quite interesting. And yeah, without further ado, I mean, for the Emperor, Ruslan is taking over.
1, 2, 3. Do you hear me? Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Ruslan Kutdusov from Saber Interactive, and today I will share with you our practical experience regarding upscalers like FSR, DLSS, XeSS, in our latest titles, Space Marine 2 and RoadCraft. And yes, it's been mentioned that all the work I'm going to present is work done by Kirill Alekseenko. So all the credits to him and his team. So let's start. At Saber, we use our own big, complex in-house engine. And the previous title before Space Marine RoadCraft, it was World Z, released in 2019. And let's start with the state of art. What was there in World Z? So World Z didn't have any upscale on the release. It had TAA as main anti-aliasing solution and FXAA for low preset settings on PC. We used fixed high dynamic resolution in consoles. I didn't have any quality presets, so we targeted only 30 FPS. Much later, we integrated FSR2 in the end of the frame exclusively on PC, which is simple but not perfect integration, as we will see later. But it was our starting point of our upscale journey. And here's the current state of temporal techniques on different platforms. Our most cross-platform solution is FSR2, and it makes up a significant part of this talk. It's worth noting that we don't use FXAA anymore. It caused by a significant increase in amount of details in average compared to WoZ and other games of past generation, and the fact that FXAA lacks temporal stability. We still use TAA, but mostly as an auxiliary path for several resources effects that need to be anti-aliased separately. TAA with special FSR1 is our basic fallback solution in case for some reason any other upscale not available. And here's a demonstration of poor temporal stability when we're using FXAA. When camera moves, background edges start to flicker. I hope you can see. Yeah? At least I see it. Even cheap TAA greatly improves temporal stability compared to FXAA. So now let me show you our resolution presets for different platforms. As you can see, we no more use fixed height dynamic resolution, and we temporarily upscale our render resolution to target 1 on each platform. We also introduced performance or speed mode with lower resolution that targets 60 FPS. Resolution scale on PC is set on user behalf. And as I've mentioned, on post-release WoZ, we finally ended up with FSR in the end of the frame. And at first, we integrated FSR2 in Space Marine 2 in the same way. Apart from simplicity, the only advantage of this scheme is saving some performance cost on post-processing effects. But we had some serious downsides, like artifacts caused by mismatch of color buffer pixels and corresponding depths and velocity pixels due to post-processing effects that blur or distort color buffer. Motion blur, barrel distortion, bloom, and depth of field in cutscenes are the main example of such effects. Potentially, we could have a problem with some color details lost and artifacts caused by using LDR input color buffer in Upscaler. And here's demonstration of FSR placed before post-processing. And this is not shader recompilator starters, it's a slow-mo. So you can see what's happening. Yeah, and here FSR is after post-processing. And you can see blocky artifacts and ghosting. Here is a bit more focused on ghosting. And here, one FSR before post-processing. Yeah, no ghosting. Yeah, so here focus on motion blur artifacts. You can see these blocky artifacts when the FSR is after post-processing. And here, when it's before, and everything is smooth. Yeah, so finally we moved the upscale phase before post-processing and fixed those artifacts. As you can see on the slide, this shift doubled performance cost for post-processing on consoles. That's why we still wanted to come up with something that would decrease performance cost on post-processing. So we tried combined upscale. The idea is simple. At first, we upscale with some intermediate resolution scale using FSR2 before post-processing, and then we would upscale color buffer after post-processing, again to the final target resolution using special FSR1 upscale. But there was a problem that with high resolution scale in FSR1, it caused serious quality drop, while the low resolution scale, there wasn't any performance win. So we rejected this idea and needed to optimize post-processing using other methods, but it's another story. Now let's talk about problems that temporal techniques bring into our games and how we try to solve them. For dealing with most of the problems, we use different masks provided by each algorithm except for DLSS, which doesn't have any masks. Most popular mask here is a reactive mask or responsive in XeSS, which increases the role of current frame when blending with history buffer. FSR has another mask called transparency and composition mask. It narrows color clapping bounding box, which comes handy in some places, and relaxes locks contribution and luminous instability factor. In general, reactive masks are used for fast-moving objects without motion vectors. Transparency and composition is used for slow transparency and animated effects. It's worth noting that all mask values are integrated in our material system, meaning that they could be regulated by artists. Because each effect or particle usually has its own ideal mask value. Usually, if mask value is too low, we usually have more ghosting. In case it's too high, we get additional flickering. Let's start with transparency. Main cause of problem that we encounter is that we cannot have valid depth and velocity value for transparency, unlike for opaque objects. In TAA, we do nothing and rely on color clumping. Color clumping is used to clump history sample against current samples free by free neighborhood. It's a great way to get rid of invalid history, but in some cases it introduces temporal stability, which we'll talk later. In FSR, we needed to narrow clumping window and relax locks contribution by using transparency and composition mask. On XeSS, we write transparent VFX into responsive mask, but we made an additional heuristic lowering mask values on lower resolution presets. And here's demonstration of ghosting appearing due to lack of motion vectors. Focus on this big sphere, hologramic. And here with transparency mask. Another common problem with temporal techniques is about fast particles. Again, we don't write them to velocity buffer due to their high speed. We need to write them to reactive mask that increases current frame weight in temporal resolve with history buffer. We still write particles to transparency and composition mask since it helps in some situations like a noisy background causing ghosting. For MFSR on PlayStation 5 Pro, we combine current frame reactive mask with previous one to avoid ghosting on particles border. Here's demonstration. Without mask, you can see ghosting sparks, ghosting smoke. In fact, the sparks are barely visible here. And Here with the mask. Much more better and more details. And here is the reactive mask values for the previous footage. Another type of objects that need specific handling is trails. Without the temporal, eats them by blending with the background, and they become barely visible. To prevent this, we artificially widen the trails so they are never smaller than 1 pixel. We also write moving trails into transparency composition mask to avoid ghosting on noisy background. Yeah, so it's before fix, and the lasers are barely visible. Here's after fix, much more juicy. Okay, subpixel shading details. When using temporal upscale or anti-aliasing, we quite often encounter flickering or details that are smaller than 1 pixel. This slide reminds us how it happens due to jitter. Current frame sample oscillates between white and black. In theory, temporal filter could just blend this oscillation and make it more temporally stable, but due to color clamping heuristic, which we introduced earlier, we clamp history every frame by current sample's rebar neighborhood, which causes oscillation in the resulting buffer. Upscalers try to address these problems by detecting luminance instability and increasing history weight in those cases, or by introducing locks like in the FSR case. Unfortunately, we can't afford to remove color clamping at all, because it would introduce serious ghosting problems, but we can soften its negative effects. At first, we should relax color clamping where possible. Here, heuristic settings for mask come to help. Then we can remove excessive subpixel details using lower resolution MIP maps in some materials. Then in an FSR case, we can reduce velocity factor to suppress flickering on some high velocity objects. In few words, velocity factor narrows color clamping ABB, increases current frame weight, and temporal reactive factor for high velocity samples. So we disable to get better temporal stability. We didn't encounter any serious ghosting issue after that. In TA, we tried to filter current frame and history using additional luminance weights, which helped with the specular aliasing. Potentially, we could try it in FSR when filtering current frame, since in FSR3 compared to FSR2, specular aliasing tends to be more visible. Here's a demonstration of using the default velocity factor value of 1, focus on the gold parts on the building. And here we disable velocity factor, and it gives less freaking on the edges. Here you can see specular aliasing on metallic plates on stairs. And here, after applying luminance aware, it's more stable. Another problem that usually takes place with some effects use jitter buffers and at the same time leave large footprint on the resulting image. Large footprint doesn't allow temporal filter to suppress changes from constant jittering, since the size of the footprint could be, say, 9 by 1 pixels. No TA or upscale algorithm is able to handle this. We can deal with this problem by using separate TA passes for such effects. For light shafts, we can apply TA to light shaft mask in the same way we apply TA to bloom mask. Bloom mask is needed to mark objects that need artificial bloom, meaning that those objects get bloom even though they are not bright enough. For depth of field, we apply TA for circle of confusion buffer and half resolution color buffer, which we use in DOF in optimization purposes. We should make this TA pass as cheap as possible. In short, depending on the resource effect, we remove different parts of TA algorithm. For example, light shaft mask doesn't need color clamping. And in first part of the video, there are light shafts with the TA applied on their mask, and then we turn off TA and they are no longer stable. Now let's look at the bloom mask. Here you can see flickering bloom on red lights. And a bit closer. And here is how look after applying TA on bloom mask, much more stable. Next thing is sharpness. It's not directly related to AA or upscale, but it's an important visual aspect that adds fidelity to our games. They feature many vehicles, mechanisms, Warhammer-style buildings with honor details. We use AMD RCAS everywhere for consistency. The first problem was that initial sharpness of color buffer was different after applying different upscales. We introduced some basic sharpness for DLSS and the XeSS to make up for this. Logarithm here is due to how sharpness value gets transformed inside RCAS. Another problem was RCAS specific, and we haven't spotted it early on. In some cases, when pixel is dark relatively to its 3x3 neighborhood, we noticed them turning into having negative values. To fix this, we patched RCAS. Specifically, we scaled lower limiter according to relation between central pixel and its neighborhood. This is a demonstration of black pixels on this sound reflection. Yeah, this static frame, you can notice these black dots. And the same picture after applying RCAS fix. We don't lose overall sharpness due to this fix. Another unexpected problem took place in armor and weapon inventory when we switched between different equipments. After switching, there are some details left from the previous object on the screen. We rejected the idea of using standard reset flag because it creates unpleasant convergence effect for several frames after applying. To combat this, we implicitly reset the history through reactive mask. This is triggered by game logic script while switching equipment. Yeah, in slow-mo, so you can have time to notice this bug. And the static frame. And here's the version with soft reset through reactive mask. Now let's talk about frame generation. There are two algorithms that we integrated: DLSS frame generation for NVIDIA cards starting from 3000 series, and FSR3 frame generation, which is available anywhere on PC. Our integration is standard except for UI mode that we picked. UI is rendered at render rate into a separate buffer and then composed the buffer, interpolated and rendered the frame. Before presenting, we use this UI mode because our UI is mostly static and there is no reason to spend performance for additional UI draw on interpolated frame. Another thing we had to add is distortion mask. Distortion mask is mainly used to make up for barrel distortion effect that is always turned on in Space Marine 2. Here's a demonstration how it distorts the image. It tries to simulate fisheye effect. Distortion mask contains two vectors, backward and forward. Backward is used to restore original position of already distorted pixel, and forward vector is used to find distorted position for original pixel. Temporal algorithms use these vectors on their behalf to generate properly distorted interpolated frame. Here you can see artifacts from barrel distortion effect due to absence of distortion mask. Focus on the character. And here is same footage with distortion mask. And here is how distortion mask looks like. Next slide. There were additional problems that we needed to deal with. We have special effect that explicitly changes motion vectors on some objects so that motion blur later could directionally blur these objects. When frame generation is on, we just decrease amplitude to get decrease amplitude of these effects to avoid unpleasant artifacts. Here you can see reference footage without frame generation. Focus on these soldiers in front of the character. They are like blurred compared to the surroundings. And here how it looks with from generation without fixes. that's not what we wanted. So we had to limit amplitude of this effect for frame generation mode exclusively. Unfortunately, we're almost losing this effect. Alternative solution would be to create second velocity buffer and use it only in motion blur. Also, there were artifacts specific to particular frame generation algorithm. For DLSS, it was some transparent UI. In FSR, it was vignette effect, which has an unpleasant dark frame on the borders of the frame. Here you can see artifacts caused by vignette effect, focused on the right edge of the screen. Here's a static frame. Unfortunately, this bug happens due to the core logic of FSR frame generation algorithm. FSR uses current frame motion vectors to derive motion vectors for interpolated frame, like on the second image. In this situation, we can use right sample from current frame and left sample from the previous frame, blend them, and get interpolated frame pixel. We are good with vignette here because vignette of these two samples is properly blended, but we need to fill this right border of interpolated image. And we don't know current frame's motion vector outside of the frame. So FSR3 uses secondary path when filling motion vectors for interpolated frame and guesses that these motion vectors stay similar when we move closer to the border. But as you can see, in this situation, we have only one valid sample because the right one is off-screen. Valid left sample has brighter vignette, and it goes to the right side of the final interpolated image without changes. It creates this unpleasant frame effect that we've seen earlier. As a result, we had to lower vignette intensity for FSR3 frame generation exclusively, just to make this bug less visible. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. Okay. Do you have time for questions?
Turn me on? Okay. Yeah, we have time for 2 or 3 questions because you have apparently a technical issue with the next one, so off into the sunset. Thank you.
Okay.
No,
Thank you.
Any more questions here in the audience? All right. Oh, there's one.
So a question about the barrel distortion that you mentioned. Does the barrel distortion get applied before or after the anti-aliasing is applied?
Well, it's before post-processing, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I was wondering if it would affect AA if it's applied afterwards, then not relevant. Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Oh, yeah, excellent. Thank you, Sam.
So our experience of frame rate upsampling is kind of similar in that it works 90% of the time, and then 10% of the time you get these like crazy failures. I wonder, did you try any other techniques? Unless I missed it, did you try the DLSS equivalent?
Sorry, once again.
Right. Did you try other techniques as well as FSR3 for frame rate generation?
Oh, DLSS?
Yeah. Maybe I dozed off during that bit, sorry. So I completely missed that. Anyway, well, don't worry. Thank you. I'll try and catch up with you later.
All right. If we have no further questions, then thanks, Ruslan, again.
Thank you.
And then it'll be like 2 or 5 minutes until we get to the next talk. But we have